Okay, so Jake, we're going to start over one more time. Okay, here we go. And action.
So I was thinking, I think it'd be fun if English, the language, was more like the German language.
Okay. Okay, wait. You want the English language to be more like the German language? How do you want us to like use more sounds in our throat, like clear our sinuses? Like what do you?
The big long words where you just take a bunch of different things, like different compounds, and just smash them into this big long word that maybe you don't even know what it means, or it means a bunch of different things.
Well, like what? Like what would you? What are you talking about? Like what would you put together?
Like existential methodologicalism.
Existential methodologicalism? Is
Yeah.
that what you just said? Well, whatever it would mean, it would have to mean something completely different than the sum of the parts. Because
Yes.
like existential methodologicalism, like what? So you think it would be fun if English did what German does and smashes these words into really like
Can you think of a better example?
like Farfignugan or something?
I mean, you say flexadaptability sometimes, but
I do. I say flexadaptability a lot because that's usually with a mission group, though, because you're overseas and something inevitably goes sideways, right? So you get a group of Americans and we got our little passports, and we're trying to cross international lines, and inevitably something, whether it's the ground transportation or something with the night's lodgings or something like that, will go sideways. And I tell teams, look, you have to be flexible and you have to be adaptable, because flexibility is when, you have to like kind of go with the flow a little bit. But adaptability is where plan A, backup plans B and C, they're out the window,
like
they're
full
gone.
Pivot to something else.
We're pulling like a Friends episode. Pivot, like you're completely doing something differently than you thought that it would ever go in your mind. And so you have to be both flexible but also adaptable. And so I do say flex adaptability. So I guess I kind of do the German thing when I'm working with mission teams. I think
this is also where this is how we planned it comes in, even when it's clearly not how we planned it.
Yeah. So when I tell congregations, this is, just tell people that's how we planned it. Because you can't get uptight, because things in actual day-to-day ministry are always going to be changing. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a real uptight person, ministry is going to be, not you shouldn't be doing ministry. We're all involved in ministry, but it's going to be more challenging for you personally, because you can't just take a deep breath and say, somehow God's going to work this out. And so you just tell people, well, that's the way we planned it. And it is a joke, but it's also kind of, I'm being serious too. Like,
well, it's true, and there's also the story you kind of joke about, the whole thing of like praying a lot and asking what God's going to have you do that day. Because if you don't have anything for me to do that day, I'm going to go play golf.
Well, yeah.
And you don't get to play very much golf.
I don't get to.
But the fact that we're walking in each day, and some days you may think, I'm going to work on a sermon, or I'm going to work on this Bible study, or I'm going to do this, and then you end up being on the phone with a bunch of different people, or there's somebody you need to go see in the hospital, or there's a funeral, and you just gotta learn to roll with it, whatever it happens to be that God brings up that day.
Those are divine appointments. Those might not be the appointments that are in my phone.
Yes.
Right. They're not logged into my calendar, but those are divine appointments, absolutely. I also think, though, that the speed of ministry is changing. Not, just take ministry in a church. It is so different today than it was 20, 30 years ago, and it's worlds apart in some ways from what it was 50 to 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. The idea that the pastor is chained to his desk in his study for hours, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't happen anymore. Or if it does happen, I would, I don't know other guys' context. We have to be very, very careful. For me to say something and like overplay
the generalization
of it would be wrong, because I don't know what, like, let's say you're in a very different context than I'm in. I don't know what that looks like for you. But when you're in any sort of an urban context at all, and Lincoln's not a big city, I know it's big by Nebraskan standards, but it's
Well-
not a big city in terms of the nation or even the world.
I,
But
I was born and raised here, and I was referred to as a big small town.
it is a big small town. That's exactly what Lincoln is. It's a big small town, but it is big enough to have urban elements to it.
Mhm.
And so if you're in an urban setting at all, then the pace of everything is so fast that I don't think you can be chained to your desk. You need to be wheeling and dealing, moving and shaking. Like I was just out this past week. I'm out of the office because I'm taking a look at possible sites in partnership with one of our other sister congregations. We got a member from Messiah down the road. We're talking with Lutheran Family Services about possible solutions. I mean, ultimately this will be with LFS, not with us.
Yes.
But we're looking at possible solutions to ease the logistical pressures on Lutheran Family Services because we're looking at possible secondary sites for storage of mattresses, furniture, all kinds of things for refugees and immigrants who come and are resettled in our area. So am I being a pastor? Absolutely, I'm being a pastor. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but I am not in that office surrounded by dusty books. There's a part of my soul that would like to be in the office surrounded by dusty books because I am a scholar practitioner. I am an academic. I love being surrounded by dusty books. But the reality of parish ministry today, the dynamics at work and at play, you just have to be moving and shaking. And you do have to be flexible. You do have to be adaptable. I think we're even seeing it in how the synod, our denomination, is going about theological education for guys that want to be pastors. I mean, there was a time you had to go all the way through the system. You had to go through one of our Lutheran colleges or universities. Then you went on to the seminary from there. It was always a residential program. One of the first changes they made was that you didn't have to go to a system school. You could go straight to the seminary as your master's degree program. But it was still now residential, right? You had to move to St. Louis or you had to move to Fort Wayne, Indiana, one of our two locations to do that. Now today, your program for how you're training to be a pastor in a church context, completely different, right?
Well, and I think it's neat, at least to me talking about it a little bit, just a couple different ways that it's addressing that flexible nature of ministry and the need to be adaptable for ministry.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is just acknowledging the reality that in not every ministry context or not for every person that's potentially going to go in the ministry that they have the means to get to St. Louis for 4 years. And so it's addressing that need.
Yeah.
This program has been around for basically almost 15 years now.
Right.
And, with the way I'm walking through it right now, I just, in November, finished up a 10-week Zoom class.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, the technology obviously is a factor in this, that we're able to meet together with my cohorts, get to go to the guys on the computer. Here in January, I'm going to go to St. Louis again, where I do a on-campus class again, where we're going to be studying worship, actually. So I think, technologically just recognizing different circumstances of life, parameters of where people are at. But the second part of it is, I just look at the other guys, some of the other guys in my cohort with me, and the different ways that you've got specific ministry contexts that guys are really focused in.
That's what I mean when I say the flexibility in how the Synod is going at educating guys to be pastors. So you're talking about that the way that this whole program is looking for you. There is a curriculum. There's a set curriculum. There's a set way that they're kind of going at it in a general sense. But the backgrounds or the reason why guys want to be pastors speaks to the just the different kinds of contexts you could be in church ministry, and that not everybody's going to be just sort of this cookie cutter approach to what it means to be in a church or what it means to be a church pastor.
So if I could, what I wanted to do is even just give a few examples of, partly thinking about my context, but a couple of the guys in my class with me. And, for us here, a big piece of it is, getting molded and formed into the associate pastor role. But you look at our key ministries with K through 5 education and with Touching Hearts and so many different opportunities here where we're, as a pastor and training as a pastor, that I get to get integrated in with kids and how we're discipling kids and sharing the good news of Jesus.
Right.
And in facets and ways that a bunch of other contexts wouldn't have the sheer numbers or the sheer quality of staff that we have, just the sheer different ways that we're able to again, to disciple kids and bring them up in the faith the way that we're able to do here at Faith Lutheran. And to me, that's a really neat context to be in. It's a really neat context, just the team ministry environment that we're in here, that you've got you and I working together, you've got a principal, you've got touch and arts directors, you've got a technology person, you've got a business manager. I mean, there's a big team that we've got here.
Right.
It's not a large mega church by any means, but there's a lot of different people all pulled together.
But because of those educational ministries, it means that your team is a large one, because it has to be for what you're doing in education.
And so that's my context a little
Right.
bit. There's another guy, and this is a neat thing even just in the program with me. There's a couple guys in Omaha that I've gotten to know pretty well, and we'll actually want to go to January, go to St. Louis this January. We're all going to ride together. We're going to stay in an Airbnb together, get to know each other a little bit better. Some of that kind of camaraderie piece of it. But one of those guys, his specific ministry context is so narrow to the point that he's actually working just with like a recovery type ministry,
Right.
with drug and alcohol rehab. Guys are just getting done with rehab.
And see, that's what I'm talking about. Like the context today is just so different. Take 20, 30 years ago, you would have partnered with rehab centers, or you would have partnered with counselors. But then the role of the pastor in a church setting would have been to be a clearinghouse. You're basically trying to get people who come to you for help just to these sort of specialized people. The pastor himself is not going to do a whole lot in that setting. This guy's training to become a pastor in a church setting who himself can act as a clearinghouse when he needs to. He can get people out to the right referrals, but he himself is also training to start and to run this comprehensive program so that when people come to the church, it's sort of more streamlined. It's like, no, yes, we can actually help you. So that's a change, and it's speaking to how we have to adapt and change when it comes to real-time ministry and what's going on in our cities and in our communities and our neighborhoods.
And even just to say it this way, that the scope of the type of pastoral care that he might be giving in that context is going to be so much more. It's not limited. It's
super
narrower.
focused, and it's narrow. What's the other guy doing? You said there's two guys from Omaha. What's the other guy going to do?
The other guy, it's a church plant that came out of, and I'm drawing a blank on which church it was that started. And the church plant's been in existence maybe 4 or 5 years now.
Okay. And
so it's just an outgrowth of a church plant. So it's, again, different challenges, different types of things. We've got an inherited ministry here that's been around for a number of decades, and so again, it's just a different kind of ministry context where they're.
But you have to understand what it means to take over that situation and to move it into the next chapter that's logical, and that is its own thing really too. So yeah, when I look at what's going on in different church contexts across the country, I'm looking at situations that sometimes need super focused individuals into one little narrow area. And we're talking about a need, not it'd be nice if we had. We're talking about a need, or we're talking about what it takes to lead in an educational kind of context like ours, or what it takes to lead if you're taking over a church plant from the planter, and then you have to take it forward into a next chapter. Church planting is a specific skill. Taking over a church plant is a specific skill, And so when you talk about where things are at today, there's just a need for super flexibility and super adaptability. And I'm encouraged to see our Synod trying to work with our seminaries to work how we educate guys who are interested in the pastoral ministry in a way that makes sense in terms of real time, how fast everything's moving and how super flexible and adaptable we have to be. So it's an exciting time for you to be. You said this program is about 15 years old, but I've been doing what I've been doing for about 15 years. So in other words, that's to a guy like me, I'm only middle aged, but I sometimes feel like a dinosaur because that means that wasn't available to me when I started my course of study. So I just am encouraged by where it's going, and I wonder sometimes when we look at our own church context here at Faith, if there's lessons to be taken in terms of flexibility and adaptability when we see needs around us. I had a letter come in recently, And if you're listening and you were the one who wrote this, it was an anonymous letter.
Yeah.
So I want to say this: if you're listening or you're watching and you're the one that wrote this letter, it's totally fine that you wrote this letter. Okay. It touched my heart that you wrote this letter, and just so that you know, we did decide what we're going to do in order to work with this family. But they wrote in this letter about a family that they knew that had some needs, and they were asking me. And again, it was an anonymous letter.
Yep.
But they were asking me as a pastor, like, is there anything you know that you can do to, kind of run after this situation? Well, I made a decision how we're going to run after it. But what I thought was interesting was that in an institutionalized mindset, what do? If there's a need or something that you see, you write a letter to the person in the institution. It's like writing a letter to your congressman.
Mm-hmm.
You write a letter to your pastor. And again, if you wrote that letter, it's totally cool that you did it, because that's where we've been in church ministry. That's what we're used to. That letter didn't throw me at all. But it does get me thinking is the thing.
Well,
right?
It
does get me thinking is the thing, because what it gets me thinking about is, well, if you know that there's a neighbor with a particular set of circumstances, do you not think that you have something that you could share with that neighbor, or some way to run after that situation yourself, or some way to encourage that person? Or we don't have to wait for the institution to catch up to every single situation that we see going on, because things are changing in our culture and our world so fast today that sometimes it's a better idea, if you see something. This person was going with this, if you see something, say something, like in the airport, it's kind of, you see something, say something. But sometimes it's like, if you see something, do something, because you're seeing the needs right in front of you, and God has equipped you as his child in order to kind of mix it up, get involved, get your sleeves rolled up, and get your hands dirty.
Well,
does that make sense outside my own head?
I think it does. I'm going to add to it and see if this helps. But it goes to my mind a little bit of thinking about, what are the needs that we're seeing within our congregation? What are the needs we're seeing within our community? And we did visioning, we did a bunch of things, and we have a strategic plan. And there's a role and a place.
There's stuff we're doing at the institutional level. Yes, absolutely.
There's a role and a place for that type of stuff. We've got a building committee that's working right now on facility expansion, and you're not going to be able to do that on your own. You need to have a committee. You need to work with an architect.
Right.
There's a bunch of pieces, but
God so loved the world, he did not send a committee.
Yes,
and yet sometimes a committee is a necessary thing. Right?
But there's also other times where.
Yeah.
It could be something as simple as, how well are we greeting visitors in worship? Well, do we need to form a committee to set up some sort of program to make sure you go say hi to somebody sit next to you in worship?
Or maybe you just get up and go say hi to somebody.
Or
Do
we need a program that somehow encourages you to talk over your fence to your next door neighbor about Jesus?
Well,
or do you just do it?
It reminds me of so there was this lady that I learned a ton from in Memphis. She's not part of our tribe. That's what I call denominations. I call us tribes, Christian tribes. She's not a member of our tribe. She's a member of a different tribe. But she was this amazing force in the city of Memphis. Today, her name's Dr. Ballard. And today in Memphis, Tennessee, there are 6 different physical campuses where her not-for-profit is really helping families in need and children who are at risk, okay? She started this thing with her husband, but she started caring for her community without a committee, without not-for-profit funding, without a physical location, without any of those things. She moved to Memphis from Mississippi, okay? So a lot of both poor blacks and poor whites move from Mississippi to Memphis, often looking for work.
Sure.
Okay, and so she moved from Mississippi to Memphis, and when she got there, she noticed that a lot of folks in her neighborhood, just on her block there, were equally poor like her, and they had needs. And so she would go to her little job, and then with the money she made, she would tithe to the church, right? And then she would buy her groceries, pay her bills, put a little something back, But she didn't save a whole lot, because she was going to take as much of her disposable income that she could manage, and then she'd go out and she'd buy some material, and then she'd bring it back to the house. She'd sew a dress for a gal down the street that she knew, the little girl had holes in her dress.
So a new Christmas dress for that year.
Right, a new Christmas dress, or just a school dress.
Yeah.
Honestly, just make sure you got school supply. Or that's another one that, you know, a kid lacks a backpack or pencils, or, you know, you just go get it done, and then you just take it to your neighbor, and it's not a shameful thing. It's a we're all in this together kind of thing. That's the feel of it, and she would just do that. She got married to her husband, and they started taking in kids who either were outright abandoned by their families, or sometimes functionally abandoned by their families, and he would add on. He knew how to build, so he would just add on to the house. Codes were probably different back then, but, you know, he would just add on to the house and add on another bedroom, and then they would just and there's been a couple dozen kids that they just helped without, you know, a lot of infrastructure, but just like, we just see a need and we can't turn away. There's I don't think this is wrong to say out loud into the interwebs, but because they're not legally adopting kids, and they're not even somehow skirting the legalities of adopting kids. But there is a pastoral couple here in the city amongst our own tribe, the LCMS, the Jacobsons, and they're down at Calvary. And I know that there's been kids who come from rough backgrounds. I mean, I don't want to say that they're abandoned by their families or something, but they come from extremely rough backgrounds. And I know that they, just as a couple, are sort of like the surrogate, like aunt and uncle who care about you, like a second set of adults who care about you, and that this is a safe place to come do your homework, or this is a safe place to get off the street for a while.
Or even just being a role model of, here's adults you can trust.
Right, here's adults you can trust. And so, again, see, and there's a need, and then they just sort of step up and start to try to fill that need. And so when you're talking about what it means to be flexible and adaptable when you see the needs in your community, I am hoping and praying for a day, because faith does so many things well. Our church does so many things well. But I am hoping and praying for a day when I get to say that the people of faith, the people of this congregation, have effectively just been completely turned loose upon the city of Lincoln.
Unleashed. I mean,
yeah.
And part of what comes to mind for me is, you might be listen to this, and maybe you're a member of faith, or you're a member of whatever church it is, and you're thinking, well, who am I that I'm equipped to go serve my neighbor in whatever way it is? I'm not ever going to be able to do what you described in Memphis. But the thing is,
let's take Dr. Ballard again, right?
Yeah,
There's this great scene in a really old movie now, The Three Amigos.
Oh, sure, yeah.
With Chevy Chase, Steve Martin, and Martin Short, right?
We know each other well, so I know where he's going.
It's a really old movie, and they're trying to save this town, or teach this town to stand up for itself against these banditos, right? These bullies who keep coming to town and terrorizing. And they're like, you can stand up to these banditos. You can stand up to these outlaws. What is it that this town does really, really well? And they're thinking about it, and then one of the old ladies says, we can sew. And then Martin Short says, because he delivers it in a way only he could deliver it. He's like, you can sew. I wish we had known this sooner, right? Like, as it looks like that's not a skill that would address the needs in the community. And yet, what did Dr. Ballard started out doing? I told you she'd go out and buy extra material, and she'd sew a dress for a little girl down the street that she knew needed a dress. You can sew. You know what I mean? Like, there's actually room for just starting with what are everyday skills that we just have to know to make it through life. You know, your neighbor down the street, it may seem like they've got some needs that are this, you know, a huge mountain of problems or whatever. That's probably not the right way to look at it. I'm just trying to make it in life. Dan, are you just trying to make it in life? I mean,
think
are
so,
we trying to raise some kids and have some friends and have a spot in the community? You know, that's what your neighbor's trying to do down the street too. They're trying to make it, you know, they're trying to survive. And so the same skills that we need to try to make it in our house are the same skills we can lend to our neighbor as they're trying to make it in their house. And that doesn't take supernatural ability.
No, this comes to mind if it, you know, it could be very simple things. It's you can sew, or it's you're down and you know that they have a busy work schedule and it just snowed 6 inches, and how easy is it maybe to help scoop their walk because their kids are running and doing this, and they don't get home till late, and
Yep.
they come home and it's done for them. And the thing that goes to mind for me of this, of who are we and how are we equipped to help our neighbor, is that
You can listen.
We're the hands and feet of Christ.
You can listen. Like if they got something they want to share, you can just listen. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't take work. It takes effort. It's hard to sometimes,
Yes.
especially if you're a preacher, to keep your mouth shut long
You
enough to
can
really
listen long enough, but
you can listen.
But
you
I mean,
know, like
but,
that's.
But we're all members of the body of Christ, and it doesn't say that we're all preachers or that we're all evangelists or that we're all the same thing.
Thank God we're not.
Yeah.
Because well, thank God we're not. Because there's something you know how to do that's so cool and unique, and would really help your neighbor. Here's the issue for me. When I talk about the congregation being finally like unleashed, or I don't know what word you use, but unleashed on the city of Lincoln, it's whether or not we start to intentionally develop, and I think this is about development, whether or not we intentionally begin to develop eyes to really see our neighbor, right?
This is about culture. This is about mindset. This is about
Yeah, and
focus.
maybe this is like for another podcast, because we don't usually do like really long episodes or whatever. These are just random thoughts from a 1.5 pastors, but there is something to learning how to see. Maybe we should talk about this next time. Let's start talking about how you intentionally develop eyes to see your community, because there are ways that you can be intentional about doing that. But once you start to develop eyes to see your community, then you see the need, and then you begin to engage the person. But you want to be able to see your community, and you don't just want to see the need with another person. You do actually want to see the person.
Yep.
And that's so we'll talk about that next time maybe. But
I like the idea of diving into that more. I still think, just coming back to me and jumping back to the mashed up words of flexadaptability.
yeah.
Existential methodologicalism. Whatever that means. But,
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, the fact that we're in a ministry context here, and just at Faith, but also just more broadly with the way ministry is moving, of just really thinking about it from the standpoint of how can we be flexible, how can we be adaptable, how can we be thinking in a way that doesn't require the committee or the programmatic response from the church necessarily. And again, maybe the simple example of
our impact in this city can be more decentralized.
Yes.
It does not have to, everything doesn't have to be institutional. We are following a strategic plan. We are talking about different things going on campus. We are in some early talks with some strategic partnerships around the city. And we do things like you and I were talking about a service day coming up in the spring. And like there are things that we do at the institutional level. Those things don't go away, and those things are still important. But not everything that the hands and feet of the body of Christ does in a city has to be centralized or institutionalized.
has to be signed off by a committee.
No, it doesn't have to be, because we are the body of Christ together. We are Christ's hands and feet in the community, but so are you as an individual. And it's not going to the extreme of individualism, and it's not going to the extreme of collectivism. It's both and.
It's both and.
And Lutherans are actually supposed to be fairly good at both and kind of thinking.
And you know what would be amazing to see is, let's say, random member that starts just doing something a little bit, and then they pull a couple more people with them, and maybe it's helping sew. Maybe it's helping with how we're greeting people at church on Sunday morning. Maybe it's helping with a neighbor down the street. And
we've got people here just started Bible studies out of their living room and stuff like.
And that kind of thing. And I'd love it to work
whatever it is.
I'd love it to work the other way around,
Yeah.
where then you come and say, we started this thing, and now we've got 12 people doing it. And then you start to look at it at the institutional level.
Can we get some support?
It grows organically to where then the church has a role as an institution.
And then it's like, let's support that. That's an awesome thing that's going on right now. Let's not get in the way of what the Spirit is so clearly doing.
Yep.
Let's make sure we stay in step with the Spirit. That's a great way to talk about it, because then these things are coming up from the pews, really. They're coming up from
Christ's body at work.
Yeah, and that's a good way to think about it. So, next time let's talk about how you start to develop the eyes to see your community differently and see the people behind needs a little bit differently. But in the meantime, Stay flexible, stay adaptable, and hang in there with your flex adaptability. We'll talk to you next time.